Don't cross the streams.
Why?
It would be bad.
I'm fuzzy on the whole good-bad thing. What do you mean bad?
Try to imagine all life as you know it stopping instantaneously and every molecule in your body exploding at the speed of light.
So, Doc, not that long ago, you and I were kind of talking about how there was a mentorship issue, specifically within comic books, like developing artists, developing writers. And one of the things that we talked about heavily was Wildstorm, Jim Lee's influence on an entire generation of creators, where he would go out there and he would identify the best and brightest up-and-coming creators who had the most potential. He would bring them in under his own umbrella, mentor them, and he would develop these just kick-ass artists. And that was kind of all done within the time of the early days of Image, correct?
Yes, he did that in his studio. Mark Silvestri did that in Top Cow, and even Rob Liefeld did that in Extreme Studios that eventually became Awesome, or I don't know, it had like 5 iterations. That was like the leveling up of the comic industry. I mean,
all right, that's another conversation. We already had that conversation.
Yeah.
Today, I want to talk to you about the current state of Image Comics. Now, this isn't everything that we see at Image, but I was reading this really cool comic book, very similar to the movie Looper. You ever read that one? It's about time traveling, kind of escaping the future by leaving, or by doing time travel. And
I
this
saw
is
the movie.
Yes, the movie. This is a comic book. It's called Time Before Time. And this is the art that I get it. This is a sci-fi comic book that's traveling between eras. Like you go to 1987, 2140. You even go into the far future. This art that we're seeing on this series does no service to the type of story, the genre. And I'm seeing more and more that whereas when Image was first founded, it was the most dynamic, kick-ass, cutting-edge art that you could possibly imagine on the planet. And that was kind of what Image Comics was. But now they've almost become like art house movie art. There are some exceptions here and there, but even a book like Firepower, that everyone seems to enjoy, and I think it's all right. Chris Samney's art is very reminiscent to this right here. It has very little detail to it. It doesn't really look great as a ninja comic book, in my opinion. Some people are going to be mad at me. But how did this become like the norm for Image Comics, where it used to be dynamic, super badass art?
They started drawing comics on a television budget. That's the problem. Image started, it was created by a bunch of guys that were doing big bombastic superhero comics, and they didn't give any shits at all about how it would get adapted into a movie. I mean, by that point, you had Superman, a couple of Superman movies, and you had one. Did Batman Returns even have come out yet? I mean, Batman was out in '89, but nobody thought about it. That wasn't a thought in the matter. And at some point, now Image in the 2000s.
I don't know what you're saying here, Doc.
Well,
you saying that Jim Lee's art is so badass it can't be adapted into movies? Why wouldn't you want the best visuals to represent your story and make people excited to put that on the big screen? Nobody wants to put what I just showed you on a fucking TV screen or a movie. Nobody wants to put the style of art that we're seeing in Firepower on a TV screen. They want kick-ass, highly kinetic, badass art.
You know who wants the stuff that was just on the screen? The accountants in Hollywood. The ones that are deciding the budget. That is all that it is. It's low.
Image Comics is creating comics for accountants?
No, they're creating it for the accountants that decide what the budget is for a TV show on Netflix or the CW or Amazon. Because if they're going to do live action, unless you're Mark Miller, they're giving I couldn't
disagree with you more, Doc. I just think that they become complacent and lazy, and they don't care about the art anymore. They just want to poop crap out as much as they can, so they can get paid by the creative teams, because eventually they're the ones that end up paying for the dollars. So they stopped going out and making sure and curating the best, most compelling artist in writing to put out there.
Look, you look at, early 1990s, Wildcats or Cyberforce versus how much does that cost between costuming, set design, and special effects versus what you just had on the screen. That one costs $50 in Detroit. The other one costs $500,000 per minute in shooting.
I don't know why you keep coming back to this point. I'm talking about the comic books. We're not talking about the TV. They adapt things from comics to TV. You don't have to you don't want to write your story so basic and boring that it goes page for page onto the TV. They should have to scale it down. Otherwise, you're not utilizing the medium of comic books.
I understand.
I don't think Image is discerning or even cares about putting out the most cool visual effects. Now, we do see things like Die, where you have great art, but it feels like an outlier now.
It is. I mean, it's the exception to the rule, but Image is nothing but Netflix bait. These comics are written as storyboards, pre-made storyboards for Hollywood. That's the whole point that I'm making here. They're pre-made storyboards. They don't have to hire a storyboard artist because guess what? The comic book artist already did it for them. They already toned it down for them. They already made the casting easy. They made the costuming. You could buy it at Walmart. You don't have to.
Nobody would want to watch a TV show with a guy in that costume. It was just jeans and a shirt.
Yeah, and
it's supposed to be about the future. There's expectations that sci-fi fans have when it comes to comic books, novels, TV shows, or movies that you're going to see something cool that's futuristic.
Yeah, well,
that had basically an enormous dumpster, like a trash dumpster that they said was a time machine. That was the only thing you saw.
You made a comparison to this to Looper. Did you watch the Looper movie? It was basically like
there were effects and there were things that were futuristic. Although that is not a distant future. This thing happens like hundreds of years in the future.
I don't know. 2140 is like 120 years from now. That's not that far.
Dude, this conversation's going nowhere.
I get what you mean, though. There's an expectation in sci-fi fans. They want to see that. But the thing is, they don't care because it's Netflix bait, man. It sucks. It's boring. But they don't care.
The story itself is fine. It's the visuals that suck.
Yeah, because they want to be able to set this comic book directly on some cheap executive in Hollywood's office and say, you can film this exactly as it is.
Do you think that's really what got Mark Miller his Netflix deal?
Oh, no, that's not what Mark got.
I think Mark Miller went out and tried to create the coolest stories and within his budget, go out and get the services of the best artists that fit that genre or that story the very best. So that way when he presented it, it would look like a fucking $1 million and nobody in their right mind would ever be able to say no to that story.
Well, I mean, let's look at Mark Miller. He got his purchase of Miller World because he had already sold Wanted, which was they toned the hell out of it down for Hollywood.
I'm gonna be honest, that movie sucked. As soon as they introduced the loom of like predicting the future thing, I was like, nah.
Well, the movie sucked, but he had already sold it. The comic book was totally different. He had already sold Kick-Ass, and they got a sequel. Great. They got a sequel out of that, but it was also that was a comic that was there was a little bit of.
They also had to tone down that comic book, Doc.
They had to tone down the violence of it, but they didn't have to tone down any of the effects because back then
they had to tone down a lot of the story of that one.
Yeah, but they had to tone. Yeah, they had to tone down the effect, the violence, and some of the like creepiness. But story wise, action wise, it was all filmable. And then Kingsman, he had sold that, and at that point, Netflix was like, "Look, we're just going to buy this guy and everything else because we don't feel like competing for the rest of his catalog." He had already established himself with filmable, but unique stories. You notice,
and none of them looked as boring as what I showed you earlier.
I understand that, but do you know how many people have sold what was it? Sunshine, the comic book, got turned into a movie that had nothing to do with that. It didn't look anything. The art was just as boring in that. There's been a lot of. I feel like all of this comes back to when The Losers got made.
I like that movie. It was a better version of the A-Team.
I understand that it was, but the comic book that it was based on had very boring, very easily adaptable style. Once again, that was easily filmed. Now it sucks. Image sucks anymore because all it is Netflix bait.
There's a couple of things here and there, but it's so weird that it was literally founded on the idea that people are drawn to the most kick-ass, visually stimulating, kinetic pages of art that you could ever imagine. And you didn't even need good writing. You just had to have kick-ass characters doing kick-ass things, and people are going to come to the table. If they hadn't missed so many fucking deadlines,
they
probably would be the number 2 or 3 publisher right now, but that was on them. But now it's just like...
sometime in the mid-2000s, they reinvented themselves as the failed TV show pitch comic book publisher.
They're Vertigo Light.
Well, they are Vertigo Light. They became Vertigo Light in the 2000s.
I like Vertigo, but it's like...
Well, there was
felt like they were selective on Vertigo. Like, you had to be a certain caliber of creator to have Vertigo put on your name. Yeah, and then everybody that got turned down went over to Image.
Yeah, and then they hired Jason Aaron. But no, you're right. They did all go to Image because Image became the Vertigo Light. It became the house of failed TV and movie pitches. And so all these was a second chance for a bunch of no-name, unable to get hired in Hollywood screenwriters and storyboard artists to put together the exact same stuff that they do for a pitch for an editor and publish it, maybe get some sales so that they could then go back to a publisher a producer in Hollywood and say, see, we sold this as a comic book and nobody reads comic books. We got 8,000 sales a month or 5,000 or whatever it was, and say, it can be done. Now option us. You missed the chance before. We're going to raise the price. Something ridiculous like that. All this is just the house of failed TV and movie pitches. And I don't know who that appeals to.
Nor do I. Obviously, we are exceptions, like I said, with Die, and we know that obviously Geiger is there right now. You got Gary Frank, a great artist. Sounds like Jason Fabok and Brad Walker are going to be doing some work with Image under the Jeff Johns Mad Ghost imprint. But I don't know, like there's kind of more exciting art out over at Boom. I think that's why Boom is doing so well. Like, it feels like they spend a little coin and they curate their line a little bit better. Like, you need to have a good artist on this story if you really want to pitch it.
Yeah, I think so as well. Well, if you noticed, around the time that Image started becoming the house of failed TV and movie pitches, that's also around the time that Top Cow kind of slowed down production. They don't really produce a lot of stuff right now. That's the time that was around the same time that Michael Turner left and founded Aspen, because that's what he wanted Aspen to be. It was going to be the same thing. I mean, I know we've talked about mentorship and everything. He was doing the same thing at Aspen, but he was also, all their early stuff had that same bombastic, huge art, with having Fathom still and Soulfire.
Is that why all the artists went into video games?
I think so too. I think
that what
I wouldn't be
happened?
surprised. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, in addition to the fact that video games pay probably a hell of a lot better with less of a deadline, you can
but
do
video games
crazy wild
prioritize
shit.
the best visuals, the coolest designs, the most creative ideas that you could ever think of. Whereas in comic books, they're trying to dumb it down to the lowest common denominator at fucking at the Netflix like solicitation process.
When you're already doing everything digital for video games, I mean, it doesn't matter whether you have like a guy in a fedora, in the shadows as a bad guy, or a 50-foot tall dragon. They cost the same amount to make.
Yeah, but one's way more satisfying than the other.
Yes, I know, but for
That's
television,
why Joe Mad's not gonna. He's not even illustrating those 2 issues of fucking Battle Chasers you paid for.
I know, but whenever it's Hollywood bait, it costs a lot more than a guy standing in shadows in a trench coat, a giant fucking dragon, because they have to animate that. They could just hire a guy to stand in a corner in shadows.
Listen, man, when they went and they adapted The Watchmen, the squid was unfeasible. You just cut it and you adapt it differently. You should make your stories bigger than Hollywood could ever fathom of actually putting into a movie, and have to make them scale it down.
I completely agree. Comics should always be drawn and written like they don't have a budget. Like they're
Otherwise, why are you doing a comic?
Exactly.
Just do a screenplay.
Well, that's the problem. These are their screenplays. They just got rejected the first time around.
Well, there's certainly a lot of that. We're actually on Sunday, which when this video comes out, I guess it'll be yesterday or the day before. That's what we're talking about on Comics Writing 101, utilizing the comic book medium to the fullest. Because there's so many people that they just want to adapt their screenplay or their failed TV pitch into a comic book. It's like, it just doesn't work in comics. You need to have some really cool things. There are things that comic readers expect. And I like the story in that Time Before Time. It's cool, but the visuals it drags it down. It's like, why does it look so fucking boring?
Because it looks boring because it started as a screenplay for Crackle Network, got rejected there, got turned into a comic so that the comic can get sent back to the producer at Crackle, and they take a second look at it. That's it.
Yeah, well, it's disappointing. I wish we had a comic book studio that only cared about producing the most kick-ass art and helping to mentor and produce the most kick-ass artists. But obviously, that has fallen by the wayside. And I don't know. It's disappointing seeing comic books like this. Like Firepower would be a lot more enjoyable with some badass ninja art.
I think that Aspen Comics is still trying to do that. I think Boom, to some degree, is trying to make kick-ass comics that they don't really give a shit about the potential adaptations budgets. They're not taking that into consideration when they're drawing. They're not like, tone down this giant robot because that's going to be a little expensive. Why don't you make it a guy in a car?
It's disappointing. I don't know how we got here. Image started out as something. It's certainly transformed into something else. There are exceptions to the rule. There's some very well illustrated, cool Image comics out there, but far and away, I find that the art in Time Before Time is almost like the Image house style, bland, boring, with the most mundane, muddied art that just makes everything look as uninteresting as humanly possible.
Well, there's no detail to it. It's like it uses an excessive amount of, it's like everybody got so scared of cross-hatching after the 90s that they just went to blacking everything out.
Sharpie.
Or it's all being produced by David Goyer, one of the two.
All right, Doc. Well, I appreciate you for stopping by here, and we will talk to you next week.
All right. Thank you, sir.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.